Because you think, getting Kirk Cousins without having to trade any players or any draft picks to do so, just giving away money, not giving away money, but with spending a significant amount of money, even if the deal's on a bargain, just not giving up any other assets seems like it's a really valuable opportunity. And then they got Sheldon Richardson on a pretty team friendly 1-year deal.
Yeah. So here was the thinking of why, this is a little bit of a backlash against everybody saying, "Oh my goodness, A+," and I felt like, hey, wait a minute here. Kirk Cousins last year was not as good as Case Keenum last year.
Sure.
I mean, Kirk Cousins. Now you had this perfect mix where Pat Shurmur and this scrappy quarterback who avoided the rush and made your line look better than it was just hit on it. And you had this, and maybe you couldn't have kept it going. Maybe it was a 1-year thing. But now you're throwing this sort of odd mix where you bring in DiFilippo from the Eagles, and then Stefanski, your guy on staff who probably was in line or maybe should have been the natural coordinator, is now working under him. And then you bring in Kirk Cousins, who's, I think, a little quirky, into the mix, and now we're like, all of a sudden, this is anointing. I mean, I feel like Kirk Cousins has to prove that he's sort of in that second tier, because if he's at the top of that third tier, and you're paying that kind of money and changing the way contracts are done with this $84 million deal, I don't know. I mean, I give him a solid B. I think it's a good move. It's a good off season, but I don't think it's just a slam dunk. And how are they going to win more games than they won last year?
No, I don't think so. I think what it does for me is it doesn't necessarily raise their ceiling, because we saw that last year when they get quarterback play the level they got from Case Keenum last year. They're so good elsewhere that even with Dalvin Cook getting injured, they were so good on defense, so solid with their offensive core that they were able to be a really impressive football team. I think what it does is it raises their floor. I can't. It's not hard for me to imagine a year where Case Keenum, regresses in a lot of ways, is much more similar to the guy we saw a year ago or 2 or 3 years ago, and where he's a mediocre quarterback, and suddenly they're getting mediocre quarterback play, and now they're a team that's basically they're the NFC Jaguars maybe, where that's good, but it's not necessarily as good as they were a year ago. With Cousins, even if he doesn't necessarily have that Aaron Rodgers level upside, it just seems like he's certainly more consistent than Keenum. And so, he raises the floor for them where maybe they are a 9-win team 70% of the time. Maybe they get a little higher than that, assuming Cousins doesn't get injured.
Well, to me, when you go 3 years, $84 million fully guaranteed, you're going to be measured by the ceiling.
Yeah, that's true.
And the floor is nice, but when we walk into the house and we're showing the house, we're not saying check out this floor. We're saying look at the vaulted ceilings. And to me, they paid for a vaulted ceiling. And so don't, at the end of this, no one's going to say, yeah, but guess what? They went 9-7. The floor was higher. You know what I mean? I feel like they're a 9-7 team if they bring back Case Keenum. So they've got to be better than that. I'm not 100% sure they are, but I think they might be, and that's why it's a B grade, it's not a negative grade. It's just not a anointing grade.
All right, that's fair enough. Well, let's talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, another team in that B tier with the Vikings. Not another team where I felt like, given their weaknesses heading into this offseason, I kind of like what they did, especially along the defensive line. Suddenly that's a thing that's been a weakness around Gerald McCoy for years now. Suddenly they're deep on the interior and on the outside at defensive line.
Yep, I think they easily could be a B+. There was a little bit of I like the fact that I think they paid more attention to this year to the chemistry of their team and just the types of people that they were adding. And I felt like that was a little bit of a reversal from last offseason when they were sort of the Rams, the team that was making all these moves that got people excited about. So I did like that. I think the only reason it wasn't a little bit higher grade is, with the first round pick from Washington, you're taking a defensive tackle relatively early in the draft. Is he going to be a really good 3-down player? Is he going to be the type of guy you re-sign, or are you going to, in the end, are you going to be saying, hey, good player, but we need a little bit more of a pass rush from him to be what, to really have the value? And I think you wonder too, what is, what does JPP have left at this stage? I think it's a nice addition. I think it's important for them to have a good year, or a lot of people could be, compromised in terms of there could be big changes there. So that had a little bit of a short-term feel to it, but I understand it. I mean, they had to get better at outside rusher, and I think they are better.
All right, so Bucks, I think I can see your point about Vita Vea. He's not necessarily going to be a J.J. Watt level interior force, and that's where they picked him, right in that draft pick range. So, but I do like the depth. I do think it's at least a coherent plan for a defense that was last in DVOA on the defensive side of the ball last season. We talked about the Cardinals. We talked about the Ravens trading up, not having to give up all that much to get their quarterback in the draft. The Jets, we can't really make that same case. Moved up from 6 to 3, did get Sam Darnold in the long run, but gave up 3 second-round picks in the process. I don't really mind that all that much necessarily. Mm-hmm. What I would say, though, is do you think they've given Sam Darnold enough in terms of his receiving core and his offensive line?
I don't. I mean, yeah, you can't fix everything at once, especially when you're giving away a bunch of your picks. So I don't think that they did do enough there. And when you look at, in fact, it's funny, I had the same conversation with someone in the league, and they're like, who do they got at receiver again? And I looked it up, and I had to look it up to get the full depth chart. I didn't know all the names. So right. I think that's usually a sign, when you're just sort of stumped when you're asked about the depth chart at the position. So yeah, I think that's tough. But they did get, I think, a quarterback who you easily could have seen taken number 1 overall. And if the Browns had taken a number 1 overall, people probably would have liked their draft even better than they liked it. So yeah. Give him credit for that. No one's going to care what you paid, but if he's the right guy. But you're right. They are in sort of an odd spot, I think, to me, in the building of their team, and that is going to be something they're going to. Are they going to be the Bears next off season? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Where you're really having to play catch up to try to help your guy.
Yeah, and I think the other thing the Bears did this offseason, of course, is make some coaching changes, try to bring in some coaches who might do a better job of developing Mitchell Trubisky. And I think with the quarterback situation in New York, I don't know if there's that infrastructure in terms of the coaching as well. Jeremy Bates is someone who was out of the league for several years, wasn't coaching, and then has just come back and become an offensive coordinator again. And Josh McCown, who they're paying a lot of money to, granted, seems like a very nice guy, has that reputation as someone who could develop a quarterback, but they're paying him a lot more than they're paying their coaches, and he's someone who hasn't necessarily developed any one of the players around him into a quarterback in the past. So it seems like it makes sense, but I just don't necessarily know that there's the right coaching infrastructure there to develop Sam Darnold yet.
Yep, I do agree with that too. You've got a defensive head coach, then you're bringing in Jeremy Bates, who doesn't have a ton of years as a offensive schemer, in terms of being a coordinator in the NFL. Right. And then what else is there? I do agree. I think that's a fair concern. I love having Josh McCown there. I think that's much better than if you didn't have him there. If you just had 3 young guys, that wouldn't be the way to go. I think McCown will be an asset. I think McCown showed last season that, he was better than anticipated.
For sure.
What was he, 5-8 as a starter or something? I think with that team, that's pretty darn good. So if he can just play some average ball for them and help smooth the transition for Darnold, that's a success. But Darnold, you're right. Darnold is not set up to come in and light the world on fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's still a lot more to be done for the Jets in like you said, the next offseason they could be this year's Bears. The Jaguars, a team that I think last year really nailed their offseason in a lot of different ways. This year, I have to admit I'm skeptical. I like the idea of signing Andrew Norwell. It makes sense. You want to run the ball a lot. You have a hole at guard. You let Patrick Omame leave. You sign a guy who's an all-pro, but you think about the last few years, this is a guy who wasn't a Pro Bowler at any point in his career before 2017, and the Panthers, looking at Andrew Norwell and Trey Turner, said, well, we'd rather sign Trey Turner and let Andrew Norwell leave. So, he's being paid like one of the highest paid guards in football. We'll see what happens there. I don't mind the idea, but the price might necessarily not be the best deal. And then I think I'm more concerned about what they did at receiver, where you let Allen Robinson leave, and you even mentioned the executives felt this as well. I haven't met anybody who understands the Dante Moncrief decision as of yet.
I agree, and that's been universally pointed as one of the worst deals in years. So I agree. But the one thing about the Jaguars is, almost more than any team, they knew who they are and who they want to be, and that's going to be a team that runs the ball, plays defense, and doesn't screw it up in the quarterback position. I believe the AFC Championship game was the first game all last season that they lost where Bortles didn't throw a pick. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were like 10-0 or something. Wow. And so that's where they're at. They're going to minimize the quarterback position, and the guard move is consistent with that. Does that mean every team should do it? No, but they're kind of set up to be the team to do it. And, they drafted the back last year, and that's just how they're going to be. I agree with you at wide receiver, but I also don't think their season hinges on their wide receivers.
That's true.
So what I want to see is, do they have some of the young guys in place for a year or two from now when you're not bringing back, Malik Jackson, or when Calais Campbell's winding down or isn't there anymore? Mm-hmm. I think that's what they're going to be facing, and that's what they're addressing a little bit in the draft. But in the meantime, can you win a championship with Blake Bortles while you still have Tom Brady in the AFC? Good luck to you. And I also don't know, though, what else I would have done. Would you have gotten a different quarterback? I don't know that I would have for way more money,
Yeah.
So they were sort of a team that's stuck in a good place, but can they get to a great place?
Yeah, we could be sitting here in a year and wondering why they extended Bortles for another season, why they extended Tom Coughlin, Doug Caldwell, and Doug Marrone for another year when none of them were close to having their contracts expire. But we could sitting here and saying that they were that close and they brought everyone back and they took that kind of that last little leap over the wall. I mean, this was a team that really should have won the AFC Championship game with Blake Bortles at quarterback. So I understand why they did some of the moves, but I don't know that necessarily. It seems like they're maybe a little higher on the guys they had last year than I am, but they deserve. They have the right to be, right to be that high as well. The Saints, a team that you gave a B-2 as well. I have to admit, even before, I believe he has an injury right now, but the Marcus Davenport trade really colors this offseason for me with the Saints.
Yeah, not in a positive way. I wouldn't think. I mean, maybe he's going to be the next great thing, but it seemed like a classic maneuver of we're one player away from getting over the top, and we have a very short window. You're kind of making decisions for the wrong reason, it felt like to me, and do those pan out? I think that was a lot to give up, and, we'll see. Maybe they're right, maybe they're close. They are a team that's close, but that just felt like not good fundamentals.
Mm-hmm. It seems like you have to really be confident about a pass rusher having an immediate impact. And Marcus Davenport, even the people who like him, seem to think that he is a project, that's someone who could be a potential star pass rusher in the long run, but not necessarily a guy who's going to be a plug and play, Von Miller day one superstar pass rusher. But we'll see. I mean, the Saints had a fantastic offseason last year, so I'm not surprised necessarily that they're sort of, again, a team that believes in themselves and believes that their read is maybe right than more others. Chiefs, another team in the same situation. Not necessarily that they went out and traded for one guy, but that their free agent moves, two significant additions at premium cost in Sammy Watkins and Anthony Hitchens. And, I don't know that those guys are necessarily game breakers at their respective positions right now.
Oh, totally agree. Now, I think that Watkins has played better than his numbers have been.
Sure.
And that's, I've talked to evaluators and coaches in the league who've watched the tape and said, the guy's running open. He's playing really well. But that, at the same time, that's two places that he's been, and he's been doing those things and hasn't had the production you'd expect to go with it. So is that going to suddenly change? I think you're banking on Andy Reid, who's a pretty good guy to bank on. I feel like Andy Reid's probably he got the most out of Alex Smith, and to make the move they made to Mahomes, he's got to feel great about that. And then he's going to have a specific plan for what to do with Watkins. And I realized, too, that it wasn't the best wide receiver draft. So all of those things sort of came together, but they look like a team that is going to just try to outscore you and be exciting and try to score 30 points. And I don't know if they're going to be able to do that consistently enough with the young quarterback when your defense seems to be clearly in retreat a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team where you looked at their cornerback situation last year and said, well, that's a major problem. They went out and signed Darrelle Revis late in the season and had him playing meaningful snaps heading into the postseason. And then now somehow their quarterback situation is worse. They did get Kendall Fuller in the Alex Smith trade, but David Emerson is not up to the caliber of Marcus Peters, who was traded. So I do have some major question marks about that secondary. I will say, though, the team that did address the secondary